G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Christie David, and welcome to the Australian Property Investment Podcast. Now, today we've got a wonderful guest, Dr. Dionne Payn. Now, before I get into bringing you on, Dionne, I want to share a little bit about your story and your journey because it's a slightly different chat compared to maybe a buyer's agent, for example, or property developer, though you have had property development experience, and we'll touch on that in a little bit. But it's where the direction that you're going is where I'm particularly interested in, and what that means for property developers and investors and what returns they can possibly get. Before we do kick off, I want to be very clear that this chat that we have is general in nature and not intended to give advice. So if you are looking for advice, please seek out an expert as well. Dionne, welcome.
Thanks, Aaron. It's good to be here.
No dramas. Hey, high impact property investment is the name of your business, but I feel like you play such a bigger game that, and you're beaming in from the UK at the moment, which I know you're on an international tour. But for anyone that isn't aware, I was going to get a copy of your book, but actually one of my team have taken the book because they're reading it. And, so you've gone viral. I don't know, has it gone viral? You've gone in high demand in our office. Now, your book, Ethical Property Investing, has done really well. You've got a great reputation for ethical property investing. And that is a very different approach compared to trying to maximize cash flow returns or hit the high levels of capital growth. It has a very unique tone and message in a market that kind of wants returns. You're getting returns, but doing it in a very, very, you say ethical, but a very moral way. And I'd love for you to share with our listeners a little bit about what I call the 3 Ps, a bit about yourself personally, a bit about yourself professionally, and a bit about your own personal property journey as well.
A little bit about me personally. It's actually really cool. I feel like I've come full circle in a way. I'm actually I'm staying with my mum in the UK. Yeah. So I'm in the childhood home that I grew up in.
But is your family with you at the moment? Sorry to jump in.
My mum, I'm not sure if she's still here, but she's on her way to the soup kitchen, which is where something that she set up in collaboration with some other people. Yeah. And that just describes the whole way that we grew up to a T. It was really about being in service to others.
Real.
So that was a really cool thing. And otherwise my trajectory has been pretty standard. I went to school, I went to university. I decided to do a PhD, and my PhD was in natural products chemistry because I was really fascinated with the power of plants to be able to heal human bodies. So I ended up doing a research study in sugarcane chemistry and looking at the different compounds in sugarcane that could actually cure diabetes. And that led me to Australia. So I did the PhD in Australia. That gave us enough points to stay in Australia. I decided after I finished my PhD that it was a good time for me to have children. I was in my early 30s, and I thought, the clock is ticking. I don't want to leave it too late and then risk not having children at all. So then when I did have children, and the thoughts differ from, okay, how do I sort of have enough cash to party, to, oh my gosh, how do I make sure that I feed these little beings and give them the best start in life? And that was actually what started us on our property journey.
Unreal. I've read that you've done property developments, and you through Byron, for example, and there's helped a number of projects. So I feel like you've gone from small projects all the way through to larger developments as well. So take me through, and this almost goes into that next question, which is about your own journey. You don't obviously start with the big chunky developments. You cut your teeth on the small ones. So take me through, what did the earlier projects look like, and then how did that springboard and elevate you to take on bigger and probably more riskier projects as well?
Okay, well, it's interesting that you say you cut your teeth on the small projects. I've done about 3 small projects and then jumped into a really big one. That was a big one for me anyway. So I don't feel that I really cut my teeth because it was such a big leap. However, the smaller projects that I did, They were great actually. Renovations, small lot subdivisions. So basically taking existing properties that were on larger pieces of land, renovating the houses and selling them, and then doing something with the land. The first project was a house which had a studio attached to it. So we split the house. So there was a roof connecting them. We took the roof out and then subdivided the block. So each of those dwellings were on their own block, and then renovated both of those as well. So that was the first project. The second project was quite similar, renovated the existing house and built we didn't actually go ahead and build. We did the subdivision, and then we sold the land to another developer, and they built the two dwellings in the back. We got all the plans and everything like that. And the other project we did was fairly similar to that. Sort of renovate the house, subdivide it, and then sell the land as well. So that's where I started.
So just to start, I don't want to jump in and distract you, but how did you get that start? Because there's some type of knowledge that you have to build, whether it's renovating, refurbishing a property, for example. Did you have any knowledge in this space, or did you go, hey, look, we're just going to jump in the deep end and figure this out as we go along?
Education. I've always been a firm believer in the power of education, and I know that you get such a great head start when you're leveraging somebody else's knowledge rather than going in blind. So we did that. We did a renovation course with a lady called Shuri Barber. We did a property development course with a gentleman called Bob. His name escapes me for the moment. It will come back.
Stick with Bob.
It begins with Bob. he's an absolute Bob Anderson. That's it. And both of them very, very credible, very, very knowledgeable, very approachable. And I was just really happy to be mentored by such awesome people.
Yeah.
And that's what gave us the start, really. And what I loved about the renovation part of it was really cool, because you got to see how you could transform an ugly duckling into something that looked quite beautiful, with a lot of in a way that didn't actually have to cost very much. So that was really cool. But what I got from the property development course with Bob was that development is so creative. There are so many ways to skin a cat, and I love that. I really, really love that. And I mean, even a conversation that I had with a developer the other day who's looking at doing a project with some homeowners, and they're looking at how they can delay the settlement to basically reduce the holding costs, and which means that they can pay the homeowners more in line with what they actually want. And one of there was a snag that came up, and the sort of parameters changed for the homeowner. And the developer said, okay, well, look, in the spirit of this, are we still wanting to make this work and get a good outcome? And the answer was yes. And then it was like, okay, so how can we make this work? What's important to you? What's important to me? Where can we negotiate? What needs to stay firm? And that's the creativity that developers bring. I think I just love the development process. And even though I'm not a developer myself now, I love supporting developers. And I really believe that if we want to make a big change in the world, we've got to use that creativity. We've got to use that the mindset that less is more. How can we do more with less? And that's what developers bring to the table. So that's really cool.
Yeah, fantastic. And then you mentioned as you've progressed, and I'll get you train back, line back a thought there. But and you mentioned as you grew your portfolio and grew into more projects, how did that kind of shape and mold itself as well?
Well, one of the things that I am kicking myself for not doing is holding on to some of those properties. So our whole thing was to develop and sell, and develop and sell, so we could, build up a buffer. But what actually, I recognise that developing and holding creates such more long-term wealth. I think is really important. So having that balance between developing and selling and developing and holding is really cool.
So is that the benefit of hindsight, or at the time did that thought cross your mind? You're like, oh, should we? But then it's like we take the cash and we can do more with the cash, for example, versus holding and the holding costs that come. Was it now because the beauty of the market's shot up, for example? Do you look back at that, or was it at the time you did it because you had to? Do you think?
Oh yeah, it was definitely, we did it because we had to. It was definitely where we were at in our lives at that point that made the most sense. I just wish that I'd have done that earlier, and not necessarily because where the market is, and also, the benefit of hindsight is that you can put into place the actions that you wish you'd taken before. So I see that the property market it's cyclical, right? So, there's going to be times when it's down and there's going to be times when it's up. And so I recognize that. And basically our strategy is to be holding those properties now, knowing that, investing for the long term is super important because it takes a lot of the shock out of the market as well. So in a sense, it doesn't really matter whether the market is down or up, as long as you're providing homes for people and you've got that cash flow benefit from it, then that's something that's important.
Very nice. We get a lot of aspiring developers, come in and want to have a chat, for example, in the line of work that we've got. And some of it is on the job. So you have to make these mistakes to then learn because every project is different. For example, every council is different, every property is different. And then you mentioned there's lessons that you've learned along the way. And you've obviously put a fair amount of your own cash into your own personal development, which is a Cherie Barber course, for example. I mean, that's probably 10 grand there. And then you've got probably development course, probably similar cost there. So you've done the investment into your own knowledge. You've rolled up your sleeves and actually practically then put your own knowledge to the test as well. So if you're giving advice to, I'm not saying advice necessarily, but if you're giving insights into younger aspiring developers, for example, what's some of the tips, tricks that you've learned that you'd share with them, apart from the buy and possibly hold, which I think is a really good point?
Yeah. I think that's really it. I think, well, a few things actually. One is, as you mentioned, the develop and hold. Two is get educated, because with that education, there is so much leverage that you can get from that. The other thing is, and it ties into what I'm doing now, having a purpose that's actually bigger than yourself, I think is really important too. And I didn't really get that in the beginning, which is probably why I was so short-sighted in terms of the develop and sell. Now, because I can see the benefit of holding long-term, not just for investor wealth, but also for the people that are in those properties, being able to provide accommodation that gives somebody the security to be able to live there for a long time. That's really important. And the value of that goes beyond the financial return. It's really about the value to the society, to the community that we're purchasing those properties in. So when you're providing accommodation for somebody and it's long term and they know that they can be there, they don't have to move every 6 months and incur the costs that they have for relocating and just about get settled before they have to move again. That means that they can contribute to the community in a more deeper way than they could have before. And so looking at it from a community level, if we're creating more value for the people that are living in our properties, so they can create more value for the communities that they live in, that we own those properties in, it's a positive compounding effect.
Awesome. We need more investors like you. And I'm not saying that to blow any smoke. I'm saying that because it's just jack up the rent, don't do any repairs or maintenance when the tenant asks for them, for example. So basic courtesy sometimes you go, hey, look, if the tenant needs something, just go ahead and get it done and fix it. And a happy tenant will be with you for a longer period. They'll take care of the property. But also, you're right, being able to pay it forward. I mean, at some point, most of us have rented, right? And we hated when they didn't. They just jacked up the rent, no justification, or wouldn't get the dishwasher fixed or some basic courtesies like that. And I think we're saying even goes bigger than the property. We're talking about the community and people that don't that have that security. Their children are going to a local school. They've got employment close by. The disruption that comes, having to then refind and the stress that comes with then having to reapply. People have dogs, for example. People that don't have long ledgers or rental history as well. So there are ways when you talk about ethical property investing, for people that are listening, it doesn't necessarily have to be developments. It could be, hey, look, just be a good landlord and pay it forward in that sense as well. I think that's something that's going to go a long way with the message as well, Dionne. Thanks very much.
Yeah, that's okay. It reminds me actually of something that happened when we first moved to Mullumbimby, which is where we live now, and we rented a property.
Yeah.
And we were there for about 3 years. But the first Christmas we were there, and I was heavily pregnant when I moved in. The real estate agent that was letting the property, he came round and he bought a rose. It's just like, welcome to your new home, and I hope the pregnancy goes well and everything like that. That was really beautiful. Mm-hmm. And then that Christmas, the landlord said, okay, well, you've got 2 weeks free rent. And he did that for the whole time that we were there. And that was just remarkable. Like, I'd never seen anything like that before. But every time I think about it, I just think, what cool humans were they to have done that and to consider it was such a, I'm not going to say it was a token gesture. When I say that, I just mean it was a small amount to them, but it meant so much to us.
Spot on. Mm. And that's the philosophy of investing, and people have done it very well. And they've probably been at the other side where they've been. I mean, I've got so much empathy when we were renting now for tenants that we've got. You just don't hook up the rent, or you show the same level of courtesy that if you were renting, I think it gives you a huge amount of empathy as well. Great message. Perfect. Hey, one of the and I've seen on your LinkedIn that you are overseas, a bit of a tour at the moment, and taking your idea and philosophy on a much bigger and broader scale. So I want to say congratulations and every success to you as you go about your business overseas. But the impactful, ethical investment development space, and that's where you're really, a lot of your energy, a lot of your effort is going into, right?
Yeah.
A couple of questions here is, how is this space changing? Have you seen? Because I feel like it feels like it's a bit like the new kid on the block in terms of the next round of property developments. Is that fair? Is this a new theme that's coming through, or is this something that's been around for a little while?
Look, I think it's been around for a little while, but on the quiet. I think that it's now that it's really coming into its own and people are starting to think more about it. And I'm really happy to play my part in that. I made a commitment at the start of the year that I was going to do a podcast tour, and I was really going to share this message about impactful property investing. And what's really cool is that a lot of people, the podcast guests, they will say, okay, well, it's not something that I considered before, but thank you for opening my eyes to a new way of thinking. Yeah. And I like to think that it's just seeding that idea, which then more people go, oh, well, this makes sense. And, oh, well, we're not actually losing anything as a result of it, because I think that's the myth. If somebody's providing affordable rent, it kind of feels like it's a win-lose scenario rather than a win-win scenario. It's like, okay, well, the tenants are winning because they have cheap rent, but we're losing. But that's where the creativity of developers comes in as well, because there's a way to make it so everybody gets to win.
Yeah, perfect. So I guess we should really go back and go, but what is it in a nutshell? So if you're talking for the uninitiated, and again, I feel like it's a fairly new conversation for some people, when you talk about impactful and ethical property developments, most people's mind maybe goes to like something like NDIS, for example, but I know that's not the case. So from your perspective, what does it encompass?
Well, in terms of what I do, I really look at 4 pillars. So I look at affordable housing, I look at sustainable housing, resilient communities, and inclusive homes for people with disabilities. So those are the 4 pillars that I look at. Yeah. The reason they're important, affordable homes, I feel like that's a conversation that's very prevalent in the media at the moment. I don't feel I need to go into that too much. Sustainable housing for me is really about, we've got a changing climate. So how do we build in a way, or how do we retrofit homes in a way that provides comfort to people regardless of the climatic conditions? So I'm in the UK at the moment, but normally I live in the Northern Rivers in Australia. We've had 2 recent flooding events. And so, number one, there were people that were impacted by that. But number two, I say impacted because the floods actually went through their properties and now they don't have anywhere to live, or they've had to spend a lot of time getting their homes back to normal. But then the other side of that is, as somebody that wasn't impacted by the floodwaters, and I'm very grateful for that. But then because of that humidity, we were then having to deal with mold. So in whatever way, everybody, the changing climate is going to impact everybody. So how do we build in a way, or how do we renovate in a way where we can adapt to that? So is that raising the buildings, raising new buildings, making sure that they're really well insulated, and we've got solar and potentially battery systems, so that when the lights go out, because the power's gone down, you can still survive and still live in relative comfort. So that's one aspect of it. The resilient communities, again, the most beautiful thing that I saw when the floods happened. It took a little while for the government response to be coordinated to get to support the community, but the community stepped in. And that's what I mean by resilient communities. When disaster strikes, you know that your community's got your back, and it will help you get back on your feet as quickly as possible. Just to really dive into that story a little bit, because it was so beautiful and so impactful. The very first on the scene were sort of members of council. The local RSL opened its doors and said, people come, anybody that's affected, you can come and sleep here. The Mullumbimby Civic Hall opened their doors, and there was a big coordination effort from members of the community in terms of places to drop donations. So whether that be bedding or food or generators or diesel. There were private helicopter and private plane operators that came and said, okay, well, we know that there's people that are missing. We haven't heard from them. Let us go out there and go and find and make sure that people are accounted for. We had people that were bringing food. It was so heartwarming for me to see the power of a resilient community. But that doesn't happen if your community is fractured. It doesn't happen if we're building on really small lots and nobody has a sense of who their neighbours are. So that's why I think resilient communities are important. And then, of course, the other pillar is the inclusive homes for people with disabilities. And, it's remarkable to me. It's not something that I'd thought about before doing this business, but thinking about how if you have a disability and there's large portions of your property that aren't available to you because you can't move around to get there, that must be actually quite frustrating and debilitating. So it's all about dignity in property development. So how can we build in a way that makes it inclusive, that makes it easy for people with disabilities to be able to move around their properties and feel that, yes, this is mine, and yes, this is accessible to me, and yes, I can thrive in this environment. So those are the 4 pillars that I talk about that are really important.
So refreshing. Thanks, Dionne. Yeah, like I've said it before, it's quite a unique message that you've got. And you're saying that it's not new, but I feel like it's a real shift in how people can look at property developments as exactly what you're saying, as a win-win, rather than I'm going to win, but I'm just going to put someone in there that just ticks a box, for example, and got a tenant in there. But you're saying if they can actually thrive in their community, enjoy living in their home, it's a win-win for everyone. I think that's, and that's where you talk about trying to get that level of growth. I mean, you put a thoughtful property plan together, you do a thoughtful development, you're going to get much better returns because more people aspire to live there, or it's much more in demand, isn't it?
That's right. And particularly with energy prices the way that they're going at the moment. If you're a tenant, or if you're purchasing a house and one might be a little bit more expensive, but you know that you're not going to have to pay the huge electricity bills because it's got renewable energy involved, or there's another one that leaks and in terms of air coming in, air going out, you can see gaps in the floorboards.
The shortcuts were taken.
Yeah. And I heard somebody describe a property like that as basically a tent with walls. And that's a lot of the Australian housing stock at the moment, unfortunately. So I think that people are really coming around to, okay, we'll invest a little bit more upfront, but we know that there's some security in that later down the track.
Well said. I mean, you mentioned about affordable housing, and it kind of pops its head up from a media perspective. But I feel like you're having these conversations with the private sector, yeah, and it's always that debate: I won't say problem, but who's going to solve this? Is it a government issue, or is it a private sector can chip in? You're nodding your head. What are your thoughts and what you're seeing at the moment?
Known to be a bit of a government basher, and I'm really trying not to be, because I really do believe that. In fact, I've made a decision. I'm not going to do that. Reason being, because I believe that this is a coordinated response and everybody needs to take part. Where I have wanted to bag the government, it's really about the slowness to them taking action. But what I'm starting to understand is that they're operating in a system that's like a big ship, and it takes a long time for that big ship to turn around. So what I see and where I'm at is that, as somebody who has this opportunity to share this message and actually take action, it's my responsibility to galvanize as many people as possible. And some people and some organizations are going to take a little while to catch up. That's okay. But that's not going to stop us from taking action. And there's definitely action that we can take. And there's definitely action that everyday people can take. So whether they're investing, or whether they've got a pot of money and they're wanting to invest into a syndicate, they can be really deliberate about the syndicates that they're investing into, and making sure that they're operating in an ethical way and operating in a way that builds more of these homes that are actually needed. Or if somebody's got a rental property at the moment, and they're looking at, how do I make this work so it is a win-win? There's things that they can do too. So it's not. What I want to say is that it's not restricted to such and such an organisation or such and such a person. It really is an opportunity for us all to work together in some way. And what I like about this is that we've all got resources in some way. So for some people it's money, for some people it's time, for some people it's property, for some reason for some people it's knowledge. We've all got resources, and we can all come together. We've got everything that we need. And that's one of the key messages that I want to bring out, because some people will say, it's the government's responsibility and we can't do anything. I think that's really victim thinking. And, I think if you're waiting for the government to do something, you could be waiting a long time and lose momentum. At least this way we've got momentum. And then from there, things snowball.
Well said. Well said. As you look forward, so we talk about the current market, and it's had incredible performance over the last call it 2 years, and with the shift in the market, there's either opportunities or some people do get a little bit exposed, for example, and developers' timing becomes becomes critical to the success of their projects. So when we talk about market movements, for example, what's your outlook when you look at this going, okay, it's not maybe timing a project, for example, or managing some of the risk that comes with it as well. What's your outlook as you plan for the market, and what's potential headwinds as well?
It's a really interesting time. People are using the R word, recession. And
I'm trying to avoid it at every cost.
Look, this is really fascinating to me. So I was in Monaco presenting. It was a family office summit. So family offices are some of the wealthiest organisations, and so I was really moving amongst ultra wealthy people. I heard no mention of the R word. All I heard was opportunity, 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 opportunity. And I was thinking about it, and I was like, is that just me? So I asked a few people. I thought, maybe it's me, maybe it's the circles that I'm moving in, because there were quite a few people. But that experience was confirmed by others as well. Nobody was using the R word. It was all, how can we use this to make money? And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. Some people might think, oh, well, you know, that's just being opportunist or something like that. And I don't see that happening. And part of
cashed in and made money during the boom. So I'm like, well, there's money to be made at certain points. Anyway, some people just know how to strike when the iron's hot.
Exactly. And the people that are striking when the iron's hot are the people that didn't over leverage themselves when the boom was happening. So they were the people that were sitting back and saying, okay, well, let's see how this plays out. Let's, you know, sort of create a cash reserve. Yeah. And then now there are buying opportunities. So whether that's developers that are struggling, and other developers that are in a much more cash strong position can say, okay, well, let me relieve that problem for you. I mean, obviously the building industry, the construction industry is in a real state of flux. And every day when I look at the news, there's another builder that's going out of business, unfortunately. But when you dive deeper into that, and I have absolute empathy for people that are in this situation. It's a hard situation. It's very, very stressful. And I'm not making any judgment calls on any individual. Everybody, I really believe that everybody does the best in the situation that they're in until they learn to do better. So I just want to put that out there.
You also.
But what I see is that, you know, it was just a bit of a mess and a bit of a schmozzle. So when, you know, COVID happened and the government said, okay, well, we're going to give these grants to, you know, sort of have these stimulus package for home buyers, and you know, just threw money at the situation. And then I see that some builders got very greedy with that. Some and further down the chain, like prices got jacked up. So I was, you know, looking at this, just thinking, this isn't going to end well. And I'm not saying that I'm an analyst or, you know, sort of I've got a crystal ball or anything like that.
Gut feel. Yeah.
I just had a gut feel. And because the overriding emotion in that I saw was greed. And it was like, okay, this is the time to make money, jack up the prices and you know, sort of take advantage of this opportunity. And that didn't sit very well with me. So it doesn't surprise me that this is the outcome. However, not all builders did that, and not all builders sort of stretched themselves and got themselves in that position. Yeah. So I feel that this is a correction. What's happening is a correction in the market, in the business model. And I think that it's all going to come out in the wash, and I think it's all going to be okay in the end. But like I said, I really do feel for people that have got caught up in this because it was really, it's really an awful situation for any party that's involved. So there is that, but definitely there's the building industry, which is in that state of flux. But I wonder whether at the end of this, we're all going to just have a really hard look at what actually happened and go, okay, well, there are lessons that we can learn from that. What are we not going to do again?
Yeah, spot on. It'll be a benefit of hindsight, for example. At the time, they seemed like they were good decisions, but they had unintended consequences that have now had their own unintended consequences on the market and other businesses as well. And that knock-on effect is going to be felt for some time. I mean, we talk about builders not being able to either get materials or the cost, and then moving goalposts with building quotes, building businesses that are going out of business. But then there's less dwellings being built, and there's less supply. That puts a squeeze on properties. You know, look at rental yield, rental vacancy rates at all-time lows, for example. It just has its own knock-on effect could keep prices buoyant, for example, because there's just not enough new supply coming on to absorb the demand. Renters, get squeezed as well. But yeah, you're right.
Everybody's getting squeezed. Everybody's getting squeezed. And then the two things out of that. One is immigration. So the borders are reopening, and people are going to start seeing Australia as being attractive again. So that's going to put pressure on prices. But again, I read something the other day on census night, there were 1 million vacant properties. Yeah. Now, there are causes for that. So, some of that may be people were in holiday homes rather than being at home. Some of that may be some people were in hospital. It's been a crazy couple of years. So there's lots of reasons for for what's happened. And I don't necessarily think that we should take everything in the census as being, well, this is the way it is because it was just a very different circumstance. But what I do take from that is that there are a number of properties that are not being used. So it's not, when we talk about hunger, and you've got some people that are going hungry, but then we've got a lot of waste, a lot of food waste. Yeah. I see the same thing happening in property as well. There's I think it's just a way that we can use those resources that's not being capitalized on at the moment. I think that there's something good that can come from this. And so I'm actually putting some thought into, well, how do we shift some of those resources again in a way that everybody wins? Because if there's win-lose, that's not going to work. But if we can figure out a way that everybody can win from that, then, there was a report maybe about a year or 2 years ago that said there's 1 million social and affordable homes that will be needed by 2036. And at the moment we have a shortfall of 650,000. So that was in a report maybe about 2 years ago. So if we look at that number, surely some of those 1 million homes that were vacant on census night and may probably still be vacant now, surely some of that could ease the pressure that's happening in the market at the moment.
Well said. Yeah, well said. I think that this is where the conversation starts to get open. People aren't aware sometimes of the incredible need for social affordable housing, for example, and they're just not privy to these stats. And I think you being on the journey that you are, being able to share, being able to educate, for example, pass on the knowledge, is then going to just heighten the awareness around it. And this is actually a challenge. And if we don't address it now, 2036 isn't that far away, for example, and that number will only continue to grow. So we almost will be in deficit by then if we're not very careful as well.
Absolutely. And then, that there's the number to focus on, but there's also what do people do in that gap? So the people that are suffering now, the people that are couch surfing and sleeping in cars and camping, like it's the middle of winter in Australia. Why?
We're in Australia, out of all countries. Yeah, correct.
I know.
Camp because you want to, not because you have to.
Exactly. Yeah. But I regularly read reports of people, basically insecure housing. That's the situation that they're in. And then I think of, well, what does that do to their mental state? What does that do to the kids that they have? How do they feel about themselves? What feelings of self-worth do they have? I think that it really needs to be addressed, or else we've got a bigger problem than just not having housing. We've got a bigger mental health issue that's brewing. And that's why sorting this out now is so important rather than waiting for it to be sorted out.
Yeah, spot on. Dionne, hey, thank you very much. We're going to watch your journey and pay close attention to the impact that you're making. So I want to say thank you very much for sharing your time and your energy and your insights with us. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been excellent. It's been a real pleasure to share it.
Wonderful. And I'm going to put you on the spot here, but we might get a couple of your books if that's all right and share. I know I need to get my copy back, but we might do a bit of a giveaway. So if someone's hearing this and wants to read more on this and find out more about what you're doing, we're going to grab a couple of copies and share that with some of our listeners as well.
I would be delighted to do that. Absolutely.
Wonderful. Dionne, thank you very much. And good luck for the rest of your tour and spending time in the UK as well. I hope you get to reconnect with friends and family and enjoy yourself there, and look forward to seeing what you do back on shore as well. And if you want to reach out to Dionne and find out what she's up to, and we'll include details on LinkedIn and also her website as well, so you can watch her journey and understand exactly how and why you're doing what you're doing. So thank you very much, Dionne. Really appreciate it.
Thanks again, Aaron.
Wonderful. That's a wrap for another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. I've been your host, Aaron Christie David. Take care and we'll chat soon.